Well, first of all, what you just witnessed here is not some new rite at the AMBO. What you see is the beautiful craftsmanship of St. Mark's Habitat for Humanity ministry making an extension for a very tall preacher. And I am grateful. As a child, I sometimes jumped when I was excited. While jumping, I'd maybe flap my hands up and down. I was never conscious that I was doing any of this until someone pointed it out while it was happening. I remember being vaguely annoyed, but usually unconcerned when worried family members brought this atypical behavior to my attention. Later in life, a neurologist cleared me of any danger, you'll be glad to hear, related to these neurosurges. As a young adult, I finally figured out that these bird-like dances from childhood were just my body's unique way of expressing the electricity of desire and delight. I jumped because I was happy. I'm told a vestige of this can still be seen as a little extra bounce in my step sometimes. The thing is, my jumping terrified my grandpa. If I started jumping in his presence, he'd say with a plaintive voice in his Norwegian baritone accent, "Oh, Adam, dear Adam, please don't jump. Don't do it. Don't do it." As if he genuinely believed something awful was about to happen to me if I kept up my happy dance. I think his primary concern was that someone might see my private joy at school and harass me for it. I must have jumped in front of him the most because I was always happy to be in his presence. He was my best friend as a child, and despite his well-meaning, if misplaced worries, I always felt safe, loved, and wholly embraced by this special man. I attribute my grandpa's underlying generosity of spirit, his abundant love, his instinct for living with joy and compassion, and his genuine interest in others as hallmarks of what I'm calling Christian vigilance. Although he sometimes expressed his affection through anxiousness and worry, his bedrock and his hope were in Jesus Christ. Advent blessings, St. Mark's Cathedral. On this first Sunday of Advent, we are invited to consider what it means to be vigilant in our watching and in our waiting, in our anticipation of Christ's coming in history, in our lives today, and at the end of time. I invite us to consider Advent vigilance as a gift from God. Now, if you're anything like me, it might help to untangle associations of stress and anxiousness over impossible expectations from our understanding of what vigilance is. I'm convinced the ancient Advent theme of vigilance is much better understood as a grace than as a burden. The watchful attentiveness we are called to as followers of Jesus is radically different from anxious fear. In fact, I believe we are called to the Advent watch to stand in pointed opposition to the world's anxiety. Its rapid consumerism, its greed, its oppression of the marginalized and vulnerable, its malignant power centers of corrupt leadership, its warmongering, and its often violent and uncaring attitude towards migrants and refugees. Here's one Advent promise. When Christ comes again unexpectedly into this world, the evil powers and principalities running the show will fall subject to God's justice. In today's gospel, Jesus uses parables and sayings to speak of the coming of the Son of Man to confront the powers and principalities of this world. If Jesus is driving any point home here, it's that no one knows the hour of his returning, not even Jesus himself. We should not waste our time or our vigilance forecasting the second coming. I also don't think any of us are meant to imagine ourselves or our neighbors in either the left behind or snatched away categories in Jesus' parable. Focusing on winners and losers in the realm of God is not about vigilance, but anxious insecurity. Today's scriptures also teach us that true vigilance prioritizes prayer. The psalmist bids us to pray for the peace of Jerusalem. May they prosper who love you. Peace be within your walls, and quietness within your towers. In last week's Tuesday noon Bible study on Zoom, we unpacked some of these distinctions between vigilance and anxiousness. Several in the group were drawn to the psalm in particular, asking questions about the psalmist's use of the word prosper. We discussed how we cannot know God's prosperity without first rejecting the world's prosperity. True vigilance then resists the comforts of our shallow materialist culture with its addiction to greed and overconsumption and its conspicuous wealth generated on the backs of the poor. One Bible study participant kept returning to the psalmist's phrase, "Peace be within your walls and quietness within your towers." In so doing, she named her personal hunger for silence and stillness this Advent. She noticed that the reference to Jerusalem's towers could be interpreted as a metaphor for our bodies, one of the places where Christ's Advent is revealed in silence and in stillness. One grace of God's gift of vigilance is the capacity to prioritize silence and stillness, simply to dwell in God's presence. Where might we be vigilant in carving out space and time to retreat from the commercial chaos of the season and listen for God's still, small voice? One of my grandpa's gifts to me was the slow and gentle way he moved through the world. We could drive around for hours just listening to classic King FM or his Pavarotti 8-track entitled The King of the High Seas. You get it? Or we might feed stale bread to the mallards living in a pond not far from my grandparents' home. We could fill this time with conversation or singing or silence. All were just as easy and natural to us. I always knew, even if I didn't have language for expressing this as a child, that Grandpa's steadfast qualities went deeper than his occasional penchant for worry. Like every human, my grandfather could manifest vigilance as anxious concern. However, his true vigilance showed up in his faithful commitment to follow Christ in this life and the next. I find myself revisiting him this Advent as my tutor in Christian vigilance. I'm rediscovering his grounded spirit and drawing on that energy to nurture my relationship with Christ. Fostering meaningful relationships is ultimately what Christian vigilance is all about. And so I wonder, what relationship, living or passed on in your life, might you nurture to help you discover the meaning of vigilance this Advent? Our vigilance for nurturing any relationship begins with our relationship with Christ. This is the ultimate grace of practicing Christian vigilance. It's about getting to know the one whose advent we yearn for, even as Christ's advent is already ours. Now that's something to jump and shake your hands about.